Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Franchise Spotlight. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about 1997's Tomorrow Never Dies. Let's go ahead and get this rolling. So Tomorrow Never Dies stars Pierce Brosnan in his return as James Bond. This movie was directed by Robert Spottiswoode. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And honestly, I wasn't really feeling this movie. I know last episode I said that it seemed like that they were trying to figure out the type of Bond that Pierce Brosnan would play, and I think I figured it out. Over-the-top ridiculousness. And what I mean by that is he pretty much takes on a whole airbase in the cold open and somehow flies away in a jet. And it's just over-the-top ridiculousness.
He's going for the bombs.
By all accounts, whether it's the lines that are said, whether it is the situations that James Bond is put in, or if it is simply just the movie as a whole. Now, the villain in this is actually Jonathan Pryce, but I honestly had a hard time looking at him as a villain, because the entire time I was watching this, all I saw was Governor Weatherby Swan. It was just a hard time for me to buy into him being the villain, being evil. I definitely think he was one of the more unique villains in that he owned a newspaper, news outlet company. They printed magazines, had TV shows, news TV shows, and newspapers. And he had his own personal army and tried to start World War III so he could profit off of it by having the first coverage of it, and his stocks would go up. This is a very unique story. We haven't seen anything like this yet. Obviously, we've seen people trying to profit from war in previous James Bond movies, but we haven't seen someone do it in this fashion. I feel like the 90s are a weird era for James Bond because everything before this movie worked well with the campiness, with the James Bond characters being suave, but Pierce Brosnan, I don't know if it's him per se, or if it's the writing, or what it is, but something just feels awkward about him playing James Bond. And this continues with what I said last episode, with they're still trying to figure out how he should play his character, because he does give off one-liners, he does give off quips, like Sean Connery, like Roger Moore, like Timothy Dalton did a little bit. But his quips and his one-liners just don't feel right. He gets strangled flying a jet and ejects the guy out of the seat and goes, backseat drivers. Like, yes, I feel like normally that would be funny, but given the ridiculous circumstance that took place minutes beforehand, I just felt like that it didn't really mesh well together. If it would have been much more of a serious moment, I feel like that it would have played off better than if they just had a one-liner for the sake of having a one-liner, because that's the James Bond trope. Michelle Yeoh is the counterpart to James Bond. She is, I believe, a Chinese secret agent, and I must say she kicks ass in this movie. I have seen her in a previous movie, which was Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, so once I found out she was in this movie, I was really excited for it. Obviously, she was in this movie before Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, but nonetheless, I was very excited to see her, and I was really hoping she would bust out some cool kung fu moves and just really kick ass like she had done before that I've seen her do. While she did kick ass, I don't think that they filmed it very well. The action scenes just weren't blocked very well and weren't shot very well, and it was kind of hard to follow kind of the spacing and where they were fighting at. And it just didn't play to Michelle Yeoh's advantage, or even Pierce Brosnan's advantage whenever he would have action scenes. I don't think that they were able to tell the story of the action effectively in this. Speaking of blocking though, in the third act, they are on a stealth boat, not a submarine, a boat. and the blocking and trying to figure out where everyone is in a certain room was absolutely atrocious. It was so hard to follow how far people were from each other. It was hard to tell the spacing between people. You couldn't tell if someone was on their right or their left. It just felt very claustrophobic, and it felt very rushed, which is a shame that it felt rushed, because typically in a James Bond movie, you want the third act, the final action sequence, you want it to be this outstanding, great thrill sequence that happens that really puts James Bond to his test, and it just doesn't work because the blocking is not done well, and it wasn't shot well at all, and like I said, it was hard to tell where people were at in relation to the other people, and it was a lot of close-ups whenever they would have reactions or if they were fighting, and it didn't work well. Something else that happened in this movie quite frequently, I think it happened 2 or 3 times in this movie, and I did a little bit of research into it, and I couldn't find anything. But what they did was they would refer to other characters and have character interactions as if they'd known each other for years, which I don't have a problem with that, but they made it like this big reveal, like you're supposed to know who this person is, but when I looked at that character's filmography, they were never in a movie. So for example, there's this character, Paris Carver, who's married to Jonathan Pryce's character, and she's revealed like you're supposed to know who she is, and it's alluded to that she was in a Bond film before, but I did some quick research and I couldn't find another Bond film that she was in, and I just felt like because she wasn't in a Bond film before,
I always wondered how I'd feel if I ever saw you again.
the way they did the reveal just didn't sync well with one another. Now, if that would have been another Bond girl from a previous movie and it was the same actress, not necessarily the same actor, if it was the same character, then that would make sense as to why they revealed it that way. And there's another character in here too, Jack Wade, who plays, I believe, like a CIA type agent, and Bond talks to him as if we were supposed to know about him before. Like they have a history, kind of like what we've seen with Felix, how Felix, I believe his name's Lester, popped up in a few different movies, and that makes sense because he's been in a few movies and they had that relationship. But with Jack Wade, he was never in a movie before, and you couldn't really catch up on the banter because they treat it as if you're supposed to already know who this character is, and they just kind of like rush him and rush the conversation, and it's like, do you really want to trust this guy, or do you really want to be on the side of this guy? And I don't know why they chose to go with that route of introducing characters like you're supposed to already know who it is, and I wasn't too fond of that personally. So I just don't understand why they went with that route. And funny enough, similar to Paris Carver, I looked into the actor who played Jack Wade, and that actor had been in The Living Daylights, but he played another character, and then he played in GoldenEye as Jack Wade, and then played in this movie as Jack Wade too. So it's like, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right the way that they're treating these side characters, and it doesn't mesh well for me and the character relations on screen, and ultimately I just didn't really like this movie. I thought it was fine for what it was, but I was expecting, I guess, a little bit more, because like I said, it seemed like that they were kind of experimenting with Pierce Brosnan's character in GoldenEye, and I really was fond of that movie and fond of maybe the direction that they were headed in. But if they continue in this direction of the ridiculousness as far as the sequences go, as far as what James Bond's able to do, I will say Pierce Brosnan is definitely not going to be one of the better Bonds in my opinion. So I ended up giving Tomorrow Never Dies. I would like to take a moment because everyone here at Movie Nights are excited to be partnering with the Great Movie Radio Show. Join hosts Chris and Gabe on a magical journey through movies with special guests who used to work on or were inspired by the magic of the Great Movie Ride. Tune in as they discuss anything and everything, from working on the ride and their original segment Around the Track, where they take their favorite movie scenes and create their own great movie ride. You can find them online at thegmrshow.com. I'll leave that link in the description below, and listen to their podcast available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. 2 stars. Well, thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.